Yo guys, what's going on? Robert Warshack here. And we had patch day today. Lots of changes. Druid got hit. Yogg is dead. Just kidding. Yogg is still pretty good. You just don't play him for 0 mana anymore. You actually have to spend mana for good cards. But the meta has shifted a lot in regards to what we were seeing played before. So now with a new fresh meta, we tend to see a lot of the decks that were still good in the old meta that didn't get any change, see a little bit more play now as people discover and try to figure out what's like the next best deck, right? So first thing, we have Undead Priest with everybody testing and trying new stuff. That's what aggro does best. It's just going to run over anybody trying to have fun or trying to test out new stuff because it's going to kill you before your deck can do anything. And that's where Shadow Priest runs in. So any player trying to test like control decks or any sort of mid-range decks that can't hold its own against a very fast-paced, large outputs of damage, Shadow Priest is going to do not so swell. So this deck plays like a old school face hunter. You're just playing a bunch of stuff on the board, timing allies for your undead stuff so you can give it reborn, and then you want to time that with your like high cultist. It runs the rotting necromancer to deal a lot of damage right over the top. It's a 4 mana 5/4 do 5 if you can hit an undead. It does not run the new priest legendary card, and that's just because I did test a lot with this card and it just wasn't. It's just most of the time, you're not going to trade with your minions anyway. You want your minions to pretty much always go face. When you play this, you're focusing on stuff that the deck really isn't trying to do. This would definitely fit really well into like a mid-range or a control Shadow Priest or a control Undead Priest, but at the moment, that doesn't really exist. It's the Shadow Priest, what you see here. And yeah, deck's very fast, punishes any deck that's slow, and it's quite budgeted as well. I think there's a total of 2 legendaries in this. And then also, I've seen a lot of people run Armin and their Shadow Priest decks as well. So if you do have him and you do want to put him in here, he is actually pretty solid as well. The next deck being Thaddius Warlock. Warlock hasn't been touched, and Thaddius Warlock is still really, really, really good, especially because, again, they have this really solid early game of Forge of Wills, and then they play the noob, and they basically put 14/14 on the board super early, which carries them over into the slime, which then discards Flesh Behemoths or Thaddius, and then they do their Shallow Grave, and it's just the same high roll Warlock deck that we've seen before. It's just really good. If it draws well, it's very, very tough to beat. Symphonies is still really good, even though they got rid of the like draw highest minion and then reduced its cost. It's still like a super great solid card. We also run the one Doom Chicken. Really solid, get you to 10 mana or 9 mana faster, so you can get down your Sargeras or your Dark Hand. And then another spicy inclusion is the Ravenous Kraken. So this kind of just adds another way for you to use Shallow Grave. You tend to you really only use Shallow Grave like on Slime or on Flesh Behemoth. But when you run the Kraken, you can throw this on any card that you Forge of Wills. You can throw this on the Noob to make 2 7/7 taunts if it took some damage. So there's just a lot of uses for Kraken that are pretty spicy. So I figured one was pretty good. Also, this deck runs Chaotic Consumption, which is another great target for the Kraken. So yeah, if you like Control Warlock, this is a very it's very similar to like Barnes Priest, where you're just like high rolling off slime and then just winning the game. So we have 2 Paladin decks here. Both are very similar, but slightly different. So we have the Silverhand Paladin, which is still a pure deck. So it runs the Countress, which is your late game win condition. It also runs the Titan, which is really cool. It runs Purator, but this deck focuses on basically mustering for battle, making a lot of small dudes, and then using either Warhorse or Crusader Aura to buff your small minions up and then hit your opponent in the face. It doesn't run like that weapon package that you buff the weapon and hit your opponent with. So this is more dude focused, more minion focused for damage, but still a pure deck. And then you have the pure Paladin, which isn't really revolving around the dude package at all or buffing minions that are on the board. It just has a nice solid curve, lots of very powerful minions, but it has a decent amount of buffs, single target buffs, like 4 Quel'Thas, Feast and Famine, Hand of Adal, and then it runs the Disco Maul along with the Horde of the Windlord. And what's interesting about this weapon is it has Wind Fury, so if you can give this 5 attack, 6 attack, 7 attack, which is pretty easy if you're playing like Feast and Famine and 4 Quel'Thas, you can do like well over 20 damage burst with no minions out. You could just do it with the weapon. So the other deck's focusing on dudes and buffing them. This deck has giant weapon that hits your opponent in the face. Both are pure Paladin decks. Both are extremely easy to play. Both are very, very beginner friendly. The amount of options per turn you have with these decks is non-existent. So it should be these are great beginner decks that will do well for you. Moving to Arcane Hunter, a deck that didn't really get hit that much. They did nerf it a little bit by hitting Yogg, and they did nerf it a little bit by hitting Brightwing, but the deck is still exactly the same because the deck does exactly the same thing, and that is kill your opponent very quickly. Even though the Star Strong Bow, yeah, this also got hit. It waits to have 6 attack, and now it only has 5. Still, a 2 or 3 mana deal 10 damage over 2 turns is still very, very solid. This is a very fast pace, basically secret Arcane Hunter. It has the good secrets, which is the cat trick and the hidden meaning. This thing is insane. This is like carrying the secret package for hunters right now. It also has the Titanforge traps, which gives you 2 secrets, which discounts Star Strong Bow even more. You have 2 star powers, which is great clear. A lot of people don't play around this at all. And it's just, if you juice this up with your Brightwing or your Silvermoon's Farstrider, you're able to clear off like boards that you didn't think you had the capability to clear off. But yeah, this deck is very similar to like, I don't want to say it's like Face Hunter, because you're like buffing spells and you have to utilize your spells to deal a good amount of damage. There's not really a lot of just like fast minions in the deck, but I guess the Tremors is kind of like a bunch of 4/1s is kind of like a lot. You have like Costume Stinger, which used to be a lot, but now he's just a 1/1, but he's still really good because he draws the secrets from your deck. Yeah, Hunter's still fast, does a lot of things. This does well against stuff like that Warlock deck that we just saw. So this kind of kills the Warlock before the Warlock can do Warlock things. And the last deck we have on the list, I left the hardest deck to play for last, and that's going to be Enrage Warrior. I think Enrage Warrior is in a really, really good spot right now. This deck can just take it out of nowhere just because the imbued axe. This thing is a monster. So whenever your hero attacks, your damage minions get +1/+2, but it's infused +2/+2. Most of the time you're not infusing this. It doesn't matter. The 1/+2 is enough. And the ability to damage your own minions is really easy with Sun Fury Champion, Anima Extractor. Battle-Worn Faceless is huge because you're able to copy your damaged minions. They get buffed from your axe, which is insane. Alkalite, super, super, super good in this deck now because it's a 1/4. You, of course, have the bird, and you can copy the bird with the Faceless as well. And there's just a ton of fire spells in the deck with Jam and Embers and the Trial by Fire. And there's a lot of really good buff targets like Olgra, Remora, and Gromosh that you can hit with your Anima Extractor. So this deck, super, super fun, super, super good. However, pretty hard to play, hard to line up correctly. The turns are quite complicated sometimes just because of how much you can draw, where to put the damage, where to buff, and stuff like that. So while Control Warrior died, Enrage Warrior is rising up. So with that, those are the best decks I've seen so far. There are a lot of people still playing like Mage and Rogue, and some people still playing like Drum Dude and stuff. Keep monitoring those, but this is just what stood out today as being good. And as if you noticed, all these decks didn't get nerfed. Like all of these decks were still pretty good prior to the patch today. And then obviously after the patch, the decks got hit, mainly Druid and then like Yogg players. So like Secret Rogues and stuff, bouncing Yogg a million times. These decks didn't really run those cards to begin with, so they weren't affected, and they're still really good. With that, enjoy the decks, guys. Best of luck. Happy whatever the hell day it is.